Barbara Pletasher there in Washington. So what on earth is a sonic attack and why might it be used? Tim Layton is Professor of Ultrasonics and Underwater Acoustics at the University of Southampton. He told me more.
A sonic attack could cover a range of different exposures, and that very much depends on the frequency. But the initial thing that came out was that people were saying it was a frequency too high for people to hear, which makes me think in terms of a very high frequency of ultrasonic attack. However, you've got to be careful here. If you expose a diverse group of people of all ages to an intense sound field, a very high frequency, they'll differ in how they respond, and the people who are easiest to adversely affect are the children. And the people who are most robust and toughest against this are the middle-aged men. So if the idea of designing an ultrasonic weapon to attack ambassadors is unlikely. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely. But because it's unlikely, before we panic and start taking measures in response to a weapon attack, you've got to go through a series of logical thought processes, beginning with the symptoms, to see where you end up. So if you look at those symptoms, the easiest ones to induce are a failure to concentrate, a failure to do your job, and an annoyance. And if you turn up the amplitude a bit, then you'll start inducing other symptoms: headache, nausea, migraine, tinnitus, an unpleasant feeling of pressure in the ear. And you can build a device about the size of a book that'll induce that to people in the room, again, preferentially to the younger people. If you turn up the power more and you build something about the size of a suitcase, then you can induce temporary or even a permanent hearing loss. But if somebody comes to me with all those symptoms, some or all of them, ultrasound is not the first thing you think of because they're so strange. You've got to look at a more obvious course: drugs, poisoning, a pathogen, some kind of illness. So let's say you've done due diligence on these patients, you've ruled out all those other causes, and maybe you've even gone to the location where they're exposed and you've detected ultrasound with your microphone. Then you can say, OK, these people were exposed to ultrasound. But then, before you start talking about weapons, you've got to rule out accidental exposure, because there's a lot of things that we can buy that will generate ultrasound quite intensely in air. The most common would be pest scarers. So these are devices you put in apartments, rooms, offices and factories, and they're to scare away rats and pigeons and such like. And there's also a whole host of other more modern devices that generate ultrasound, often not intense enough to create strong effects, but they're out there.
You think it is not a sonic attack, or just that we don't have the evidence to judge that yet?
I'm saying we definitely don't have the evidence at hand to make that judgment, but I've laid out that before you start talking about an ultrasonic attack, it's very important to do a series of steps. And I mean, it's not so, if it's of the right frequency, you can even detect ultrasound in your area with a smartphone or a tablet computer. I put a video on YouTube on how to do that. If it's very high frequency, you can't do that. But then again, also that higher frequency sound is less likely to affect people. So it isn't so hard to detect, but it is extremely unpredictable in its outcomes when you expose somebody, unless you go for broke and use very, very high exposures, in which case it's frankly unethical.
Professor Tim Layton there, who is a Professor of Ultrasonics and Underwater Acoustics at Southampton University.